Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Dragon Prince Yuan Season 3 episode number 8 based on novel. So let's start. When Zhu Yuan's words landed in the giant hall, it immediately drew a wave of stunned gazes. No one had even considered that he would plan on participating in the cave match. One must know that although the purple sash disciples from both sides were no longer able to participate, the disciples sent would be the elites of the gold sash. Though Zhu Yuan was also a gold sash disciple, he was after all far too new, and there was still a tremendous gap between him and the older disciples. Zhu Yuan had such a hard time against Lu Feng in the peak selection ceremony, an opponent who was only at the peak 4th layer alpha origin, someone who was not even a true 5th layer. On the other hand, most of the inner mountain gold sash disciples had already stepped into the 5th layer alpha origin stage, while those such as Tong Long and Cao Shi were powerful even amongst the 5th layer. As such, many felt that Zhu Yuan basically did not qualifications to participate in battles at this level. Hence why Cao Shi could not help but mock the former after hearing his words. However, Zhu Yuan ignored the mockery and the skeptical gazes, only looking straight at Shen Taiyuan with a calm expression. Shen Taiyuan had likewise been stunned, Zhu Yuan's actions clearly out of his expectations. Soon after, he began to frown. At the end of the day, what he valued in Zhu Yuan was the latter's potential. Zhu Yuan was currently only a 2nd layer alpha origin, and although he had managed to defeat the peak 4th layer alpha origin Lu Feng in the peak selection ceremony, even Lu Feng would not dare to muddle in a fight like this. If any other ordinary disciple had said such words, Shen Taiyuan would have berated him or her long ago. However, Zhu Yuan was after all somewhat different from the rest. Hence, Shen Taiyuan did not rebuke Zhu Yuan's behavior, and merely said, "Zhu Yuan, you don't have to force yourself. There is no need to compete with others for the time being. Given your talent, you will surely begin to truly stand out after a year or two." Although he did have high hopes of Zhu Yuan, Shen Taiyuan believed that the former had only said those words in the heat of the moment. In addition, this matter affects the face of our faction, and we cannot afford to make any reckless decisions. Cao Shi coolly looked at Zhu Yuan upon hearing this. Zhu Yuan calmly replied, "Teacher Shen, as the saying goes, one should not get a reward one does not deserve. If I do not make any contributions, I will not be able to accept the Purple Genesis cave dwelling even if we do end up winning it." Cao Shi sneered and said, "At least you still have some self-awareness." Zhu Yuan shot the former an indifferent glance, before continuing, "Teacher Shen must feel that I am not strong enough, but there's a simple solution. Allow me to have a match with one of the 3 current representatives. If I somehow win, I will replace him, while if I lose, I will naturally no longer speak of this matter, and not entertain any thoughts about the Purple Genesis cave dwelling." By this point, Zhu Yuan's true goal was finally revealed. How could he not know that numerous of the more senior disciples looked down on him, because he was new? At the same time, they also felt that Teacher Shen was being very unfair. However, they did not have the courage to raise their objections so publicly like Cao Shi, but the truth was that they refused to acknowledge Zhu Yuan in their hearts. If not, Cao Shi would not have managed to garner so much support. In such a circumstance, for Zhu Yuan to smoothly keep the Purple Genesis cave dwelling in his pocket, he would first need to win over the other disciples. But because he was only a new disciple without any experience, trying to convince them with the potential of the peak selection ceremony champion was clearly an impossible fantasy. Therefore, he would use the most direct and effective method. No argument could beat the hard truth of reality asterisk. Sure enough, Zhu Yuan's words caused another wave of noise to rise in the hall, every disciple dumbstruck once again. No one had expected Zhu Yuan to have such charisma. He actually intended to use one of the 3 participants as an example. Was he crazy? One must know that Tong Long, Pan Song and Cao Shi were powerful practitioners even amongst the 5th layer alpha origin, strength that far surpassed Lu Feng's. Where had Zhu Yuan found the courage to suggest facing them in battle? Tong Long, Cao Shi and Pan Song were stunned. Soon after, they looked at each other, seeing the amusement in each other's eyes. They too had never expected Zhu Yuan to be so arrogant. Just below Shen Taiyuan, Zhu Tai was also quite amazed as he let out a helpless chuckle. Junior brother Zhu Yuan was indeed no kind Buddha, and refused to lose out even a little. But was a counterattack like this a little too reckless? He, junior brother Zhu Yuan is really something. Zhong Yang laughed in amusement. The other purple sash disciples also chuckled as they nodded. From their appearances, they clearly felt that Zhu Yuan was not using his head. This was practically akin to a calf being unafraid of a tiger. Sure, he had courage, but he lacked self-awareness. Shen Taiyuan was both surprised and amazed as he stared at Zhu Yuan. The latter's suggestion had once again surpassed his expectations. After some silence, he finally said, "You mean to challenge one of the three to see who is most suitable to participate in the cave match?" His gaze flickered in thought as he slowly continued, "Are you certain, Zhu Yuan? Once I agree, there will be no turning back. If you end up losing, the Purple Genesis cave dwelling will truly be out of your reach." Zhu Yuan nodded with a calm face. Shen Taiyuan took one deep look at Zhu Yuan, before he ultimately said, "Since that is your decision, we shall do as you suggested. Which the three do you choose as your opponent?" Zhu Yuan's gaze slowly shifted under the numerous watching eyes in the hall, no surprise whatsoever, as it ultimately paused on Kaosha. Since Kaosha was the one who had kicked up such a fuss, he shall be used to establish Zhu Yuan's reputation in St. Genesis Peak. Kaosha was likewise unsurprised. Instead, he grinned as he shook his head towards Tong Long and Pan Song, and jokingly said, "I can't believe that the day will come where I'm being treated as a soft persimmon. Ah well, teaching a new junior how to behave is something a senior should do. I shall accept this challenge." His tone indicated that he felt no pressure at all, but was instead ready to toy with Zhu Yuan. Numerous disciples softly laughed around him. Shen Taiyuan slowly said, "Since that is the case, the match between the two of you shall be held 5 days later. The victor shall be allowed to become one of the 3 participants for the cave match." Shen Taiyuan's gaze paused on Zhu Yuan's figure. He had still decided to give Zhu Yuan more time, because from a certain point of view, he hoped that Zhu Yuan would really be able to create a miracle. If that happened, it would mean that Zhu Yuan truly did possess the potential that would enable him to stand against the masses. However, if Zhu Yuan were to lose, Shen Taiyuan would not be able to stop himself from feeling disappointed, because it meant that Zhu Yuan's was merely reckless, and someone with such character could never be destined for greater things. Shen Taiyuan slowly withdrew his gaze as he sighed softly and sighed. "Zhu Yuan, I hope that you do not disappoint me." In the wake of Zhu Yuan and Kaosha's match being settled, the atmosphere in the hall changed once again, numerous gazes filled with pity as they constantly glanced towards Zhu Yuan. It was obvious that almost no one believed Zhu Yuan would be able to beat Kaosha. The latter was after all a true blue 5th layer alpha origin. In fact, some of the disciples even felt that due to being unable to bear the pressure of so many people objecting to him, Zhu Yuan had intentionally found an excuse for him to gracefully leave the stage. This idea made several disciples secretly nod their heads in approval. At least this new disciple was still somewhat tactful, and understood that a Purple Genesis cave dwelling was still out of his reach. At the highest point of the hall, Shen Taiyuan coughed softly, drawing back the gazes of the numerous disciples. His expression had returned to its usual stern state as his gaze swept around the hall. "Many new disciples have joined us, and all of us will be of the same group in the future. I hope that we can look out for each other." After saying a few more stereotypical welcoming words, Shen Taiyuan said, "Everyone who has joined the Inner Mountains is allowed to select a Genesis Chi cultivation method. Black Sash disciples may choose low-tier grade 5 Genesis Chi cultivation methods. Gold Sash disciples may choose high-tier grade 5 Genesis Chi cultivation methods. While Purple Sash disciples may choose grade 6 Genesis Chi cultivation methods." The numerous new disciples exploded into noise, each disciple wide-eyed as excitement filled their faces. They had come to the Tsangshuan sect because it possessed better and higher-tier Genesis Chi cultivation methods and techniques. These were the most valuable, because they would enable them to cultivate higher-grade Genesis Chi. As expected of the Tsangshuan sect, Zhu Yuan could not help but praise inside. In the Great Zhu Empire, a grade 4 Genesis Chi cultivation method was already considered the best of the best, while a grade 5 Genesis Chi cultivation method would be considered an ultimate treasure even in the more powerful empires and great clans. The majority of the new disciples here were only cultivating grade 4 Genesis Chi. Now that they were finally able to obtain higher-ranked cultivation methods in the Inner Mountains, how could they not be excited and overwhelmed with emotion? In contrast, Zhu Yuan was not interested in the Genesi Chi cultivation methods, because the ancestral dragon scripture he practiced was far too tyrannical. Once one was on this road, one would no longer be able to change to another cultivation method. Of course, it was also because his Omnipython was already a grade 6 Genesis Chi. Moreover, Zhu Yuan could feel that his Omnipython Chi was top tier even amongst the other grade 6 Genesis Chi. If one were to talk about quality, Zhu Yuan believed that none of the Purple Sash disciples had better Genesis Chi than him. And if he really wanted to find someone who could compete in Genesis Chi quality, even in the entire Zhongshuan sect, it was likely that only the 10 Great Chosens would be able to put up a fight. Of course, it must be noted that the quality of one's Genesis Chi was only one of the factors that contributed to one's strength, so the person with the best Genesis Chi may not necessarily be the strongest. But at the very least, it was an advantage. While all the other disciples were bubbling with excitement, Zhu Yuan's expression remained cool and collected. Shen Taiyuan nodded at this sight. Dropping such a huge carrot in front of them should motivate them to train hard. While he was thinking such thoughts, he saw Zhu Yuan still as an ancient well-like face. This brat. A slight surge of annoyance rose in Shen Taiyuan's heart. He pondered for a brief moment, before he spoke once again. Besides cultivation methods, our Saint Genesis Peak also has numerous Genesis techniques, 8 low-grade heaven tier techniques, and 3 mid-grade heaven tier techniques. These words practically caused the entire hall to explode. Let alone the new disciples, even the eyes of the more senior ones began to glow with desire. This was a heaven tier Genesis technique. An object of desire that could turn countless experts into an unruly crowd anywhere in Zhongshuan heaven. Zhu Yuan also felt a rush of excitement as interest flowed out in his eyes. That Zhongshuan sect was truly rich in resources. It was hard to believe that they would have so many of even heaven-tier Genesis techniques. Shen Taiyuan finally felt a little pleased when he saw that Zhu Yuan's coolness had been broken, and began to speak once again. However, nothing is more famous in our Zhongshuan sect than the 7 Zhongshuan arts. A new disciple curiously asked, the 7 Zhongshuan arts. Shen Taiyuan explained, the 7 Zhongshuan arts were personally created by Patriarch Kang Xian many years ago. When combined, it is known as the Zhongshuan Saint Art, a true saint-tier Genesis technique. Gasps filled the giant hall. Even Zhu Yuan felt his heart beat violently in excitement, as he subconsciously wet his lips. A Saint Genesis technique, a legendary Saint Genesis technique. It was said that every Saint Genesis technique possessed earth-shattering power that could basically be described as godlike. Zhu Yuan had never heard of any information regarding a Saint Genesis technique. After all, it was just far too rare. He never imagined that he would hear of it here today. Shen Taiyuan continued, that Zhongshuan Saint Art was split into 7 parts, each safeguarded by one of the 7 peaks. Only the chief disciples of each peak would have the right to practice it. The art of our Saint Genesis Peak is called the Omega Saint Spirit Art, and is a high-grade heaven Genesis technique. Numerous disciples clicked their tongues in wonder. To think that it would still be able to reach the high-grade heaven tier even after being split into 7. From this, one could see just how frightening it was. Shen Taiyuan grinned in a pleased manner inside, when he saw the faint look of desire on Zhu Yuan's face. Rat, this old man refuses to believe that I can't tempt your heart. Teacher Shen, how do we gather the 7 arts? Zhu Yuan could not help but ask, a fire burning in his eyes. High-grade heaven tier was indeed already crazy amazing, but he still wondered how to accumulate all 7 arts. Shen Taiyuan hesitated for a moment, before he explained, like I said earlier, each of the 7 peaks have 1 art, and according to the rules of the sect, anyone who wishes to gather all 7 will have to initiate the Chosen's Challenge. Chosen's Challenge? Zhu Yuan was taken aback. Only the chief disciples of the various peaks have the qualifications to initiate the Chosen's Challenge. Simply put, it is to challenge the chief disciples of another peak. If one managed to clinch victory, one would be able to take the art from the loser's peak and practice it. However, the Chosen's Challenge is very unfavorable to the challenger, because the other party would have the home ground advantage. The challenged only needs to defend his or her own peak, while receiving Genesis Chi from the peak that will dramatically raise one's power. Shen Taiyuan slowly said, to obtain victory, the challenger's strength would need to surpass the chief disciple of the other peaks by a substantial amount. Amazement was revealed on Zhu Yuan's face. So this was the Chosen's Challenge. It really did make one's blood boil with excitement. That Zhongshuan sect really know how to make their rules. Shen Taiyuan continued, currently, the disciple who has initiated the most challenges is the head of the 10 great Chosens, Chu Qing. He has initiated 5 Chosen's challenges and succeeded in 4 of them. In other words, he has already gathered 5 of the 7 Sangshuan arts, and is said to be the strongest chosen even amongst all the generations. Zhu Yuan's eyes widened. To think that Chu Qing was so powerful. He had managed to take 5 of the 7 Sangshuan arts. If he managed to win 2 more, wouldn't he have gathered all 7 arts and combined them into the Saint Tier technique? Just behind Chu Qing is the Sword Cometh Peaks Kong Shing. He has initiated 3 Chosen's challenges, and has succeeded in all of them. He now has 4 of the 7 Sangshuan arts. The Snow Lotus Peaks Li Qingchan has also initiated 3 challenges, and like Kongxing has obtained 4 arts. The other Chosens have each initiated 1 Chosen's challenge. At this point, Zhu Yuan suddenly discovered that Shen Taiyuan's expression had turned a little unnatural. The former's heart jumped in his chest, as he could not help but ask, which of the peaks did all the 10 Chosen's challenge? Shen Taiyuan's face seemed to gradually turn black with anger, before he suddenly began to curse in a muffled voice. The little bastards, all of them only know how to bully a soft persimmon. All 10 of them have challenged our Saint Genesis Peak, and every single one has succeeded. Zhu Yuan was stupefied, nearly choking to death in amazement. Didn't this mean that the Omega Saint Spirit art of their Saint Genesis Peak was already in the hands of every single one of the 10 great Chosens? The corners of his lips twitched as he gazed at the black-faced Shen Taiyuan. God damn it, it was supposed to be the best technique of Saint Genesis Peak, but it turns out that all 10 of the Chosens each had a copy. What the heck was this? Bulk distribution. He finally began to understand just how pathetic Saint Genesis Peak was in the Sangshuan sect. By the time Shen Taiyuan was finished, the atmosphere in the hall had undoubtedly turned somewhat awkward. Numerous new disciples looked at each other, while the senior disciple's expression appeared quite unnatural. This matter was quite humiliating after all. The ultimate technique that only the chief disciple of each peak should have was now something that basically all 10 of the Chosens also possessed. However, no matter how embarrassed they felt inside, they were pretty much helpless with regards to this situation. After all, the past few chief disciples of Saint Genesis Peak were indeed lacking compared to the other 6 peaks. If not, their Saint Genesis Peak would not be incapable of occupying even a single spot in the 10 great Chosens. Although they had yet to select their chief disciples for this generation, there was a joke many disciples shared in the inner mountains of the Sangshuan sect. In every generation, if a new individual were to replace one of the 10 great Chosens, the first thing he needed to do was to head towards Saint Genesis Peak and easily sweep away its chief disciple, and effortlessly bring back the Omega Saint Spirit art. From a joke like this, one could see just how pathetic Saint Genesis Peak was. At the highest location in the hall, Shen Taiyuan's expression fluctuated for some time, before gradually returning to calmness. Although it was humiliating, he was already numb to it after so many years. However, Shen Taiyuan still strongly desired to change this situation. After all, he did feel that he had nothing to be proud of when he met the other elders in the Sangshuan sect. Hence why he currently valued Zhu Yuan so much. It had not been easy for a champion of the peak selection ceremony to come to their Saint Genesis Peak. Although Shen Taiyuan did not truly expect Zhu Yuan to be as outrageously amazing as Chu Qing, at the very least, the former hoped that he would be able to properly defend their Saint Genesis Peak's Omega Saint Spirit art, and not allow the other Chosens to take it away so easily. Shen Taiyuan took a deep look at Zhu Yuan, the meaning in his eyes extremely clear. Kid, I have very high hopes for you. As the receiver of Shen Taiyuan's gaze, the corners of Zhu Yuan's eyes twitched involuntarily. I only came to Saint Genesis Peak because Patriarch Kang Xian sealed the second Saint Rune here. Could you not put so much pressure on me? However, even if he did not say anything, he was indeed somewhat interested in the Omega Saint Spirit art. A high-grade Heaven Genesis technique was top tier even in the entire Kang Xian Heaven, and he naturally desired to learn it. Of course, there was also a tiny sliver of ambition in depths of his heart. He was very curious to find out what kind of power the Saint Genesis technique that resulted from combining the 7 arts would be. But of course, gathering the 7 arts would be an exceedingly difficult task. Didn't he hear that even the head of the 10 great Chosens, Chu Qing, only managed to assemble 5 of the arts even till now? If he was not wrong, the remaining 2 likely belonged to the Snow Lotus Peak and the Sword Cometh Peak. The 2 peaks whose chief disciples were the 2nd-ranked Kongxing and 3rd-ranked Li Qingchan. These 2 definitely possessed extraordinary strength, and though there may be a slight gap between them and Chu Qing, as the ones who were being challenged, they had the home ground advantage, and could receive Genesis Chi from their peaks. This factor was evidently enough to make up for the slight gap between them. Therefore, Chu Qing's only failure should have been at the hands of Kong Sheng or Li Qingqian. The fire of ambition slowly began to rise in Zhu Yuan's eyes, before gradually fading away. Gathering all 7 arts was still very far away, and what he needed to do now was to ground himself and take things one step at a time. Alright, we'll keep this discussion for another day. Let's begin today's morning class. Shen Taiyuan's gaze swept across the hall, suppressing the noise, before looking towards the new disciples. Those that have recently joined us should make good use of every morning class. This training session will be very beneficial for all of you. The moment the last word left his mouth, boundless Genesis Qi began to sweep out of Shen Taiyuan's body. At this moment, Zhu Yuan and the rest discovered rays of light emerging from the old mats under them that rose up to envelope their bodies. This is... Zhu Yuan could sense a peculiar power inside the light. There was only a tiny bit of it, and it seemed very similar to spirit power. The numerous new disciples curiously observed this scene. The more senior disciples to the front had already closed their eyes, the spirits between their brows beginning to flicker. They directly entered into a state of cultivation, heading towards the Alpha Origin Heaven to transport Alpha Origin Qi back. Everyone's spirits have been boosted. Zhu Yuan remarked in amazement inside. While the senior disciples were rousing their spirits, he had felt their spirits being strengthened. Zhu Yuan seemed to fall into thought for a brief moment. Soon after, he ceased hesitation, and also closed his eyes as the spirit between his brows fiercely shuddered. His spirit left his body, rising into the air. In an instant, it had stepped into the wondrous Alpha Origin Heaven. The Alpha Origin Heaven was filled with world essence like Alpha Origin Qi. However, astral winds were also present that tore at his spirit. Zhu Yuan's spirit stood in the air and raised its hands slightly. He saw a faint barrier of light around his spirit that not only strengthened it, but also helped to defend against the astral winds in the Alpha Origin Heaven. So the Alpha Origin Cliff and mat are both Genesis treasures that can amplify the power of one's spirit while also increasing its defenses. This will allow us to stay longer in the Alpha Origin Heaven, and thus bring back even more Alpha Origin Qi. Zhu Yuan was struck by a flash of understanding, which was quickly followed by a surge of happiness. So these were the benefits of the tri-daily morning class. With them, he would be able to bring back much more Alpha Origin Qi. With such thoughts in mind, he delayed no further. With a thought, spirit power abruptly swept outwards, transforming into large hands that began to scoop up the surrounding Alpha Origin Qi. The strengthening of his spirit greatly increased Zhu Yuan's effectiveness. Strand after strand of Alpha Origin Qi was rapidly gathered, joining the steadily growing stream around his spirit that gradually turned into a storm. This speed made Zhu Yuan refreshed. I wonder how many breaths the Alpha Origin Qi I bring back will last this time. In the outer mountains, the Alpha Origin Qi Zhu Yuan brought back for the first time had lasted over 2,300 breaths. As he grew more and more proficient, each trip now lasted about 3,000 breaths. Zhu Yuan was itching to find out how many breaths the Alpha Origin Qi brought back by his strengthened spirit would be this time. The hall was peacefully silent. Numerous disciples had their eyes shut as they cultivated, the spirit between their brows flickering, a sign that they were collecting Alpha Origin Qi in the Alpha Origin Heaven. Shen Taiyuan watched them from above, his gaze ultimately stopping on Zhu Yuan's figure as his eyes seemed to glimmer. I wonder how much Alpha Origin Qi this little fellow will bring back with the boosts from the Alpha Origin Cliff and Timeless Mat. The more Alpha Origin Qi one brought back, the faster one's progress in the Alpha Origin stage. This was also considered part of one's potential, which was why Shen Taiyuan could use this chance to probe Zhu Yuan. Although he would not be able to make a complete judgment based on this, he would at least have a peek at Zhu Yuan's potential. Shen Taiyuan looked towards the glossy walls of the hall where faint glows were emerging. If one took a closer look, one would see names appearing one after another. This was called the Alpha Origin Wall, and recorded the amount of Alpha Origin Qi every successive generation of Saint Genesis Peak disciples managed to bring back on their first time using the Alpha Origin Cliff and Timeless Mat. In Shen Taiyuan's memory, numerous astounding disciples had emerged from Saint Genesis Peak in its golden age, and the top 10 disciples on the wall had brought back Alpha Origin Qi that lasted over 6,000 breaths. However, Saint Genesis Peak had gradually fell into decline later on, and not a single disciple had been able to enter the ranks of the top 10 for many years, a situation that was rather awkward indeed. Shen Taiyuan sighed in his heart, before focusing on Zhu Yuan as he mumbled to himself. Zhu Yuan, show me how capable the latest champion of the peak selection ceremony is. Strand after strand of alpha origin, chi drifted in the primal chaos-like domain, giving off a mysterious and profound aura. One would see countless streams of alpha origin chi flowing towards a certain location, ultimately joining the enormous tornado there which was made entirely from alpha origin chi. Zhu Yuan's spirit stood at the eye of the tornado, moving constantly to seek out more alpha origin chi. There were 9 levels in the alpha origin heaven, and as a second-layer alpha origin stage practitioner, Zhu Yuan was currently in the second level. The alpha origin chi here was clearly more concentrated than the first. Hence, Zhu Yuan could collect even more alpha origin chi than before. The alpha origin cliff and timeless mat are amazing. I almost can't believe the huge boost they have provided to my spirit. While Zhu Yuan was gathering alpha origin chi, he was also keeping track of his spirit's energy levels. If it were the past, he would have been fast approaching his limit by this time, but he currently felt as if he had plenty of energy left to spare. This was clearly the handiwork of the alpha origin cliff and timeless mat. He sighed, as expected of the Zhangshuan sect. They were truly rich with abundant resources, and could even provided special cultivation treasures to aid their numerous disciples. If it was the Kangman continent, the powerful and empires and great clans would surely hide away such treasures. The first time I brought back alpha origin chi, it lasted for over 2,000 breaths, and as I gradually grew more practiced, I managed to achieve 3,000 breaths. But this was before my spirit reached the corporeal stage. After my spirit cultivation breakthrough, I am able to bring back 4,000 breaths of alpha origin chi. With the alpha origin cliff and timeless mat, I may be able to touch the 5,000 breath mark. Joy began to flood Zhu Yuan's heart. He knew that bringing back more alpha origin chi only grew increasingly difficult. Though every additional breath of alpha origin chi one brought back would be more concentrated, it would also be more taxing on one's spirit. To raise Zhu Yuan's limit by a whole 1,000 breaths was proof of how incredible the two treasures were. Zhu Yuan's cultivation progress would undoubtedly increase with this. With happiness bubbling in his heart, Zhu Yuan's spirit power continued to spread, swiftly sucking over strand after strand of alpha origin chi. A long time passed in this manner. At a certain point in time, Zhu Yuan finally felt a trace of exhaustion spread from the depths of his spirit due to using too much spirit power. He had evidently reached his limit. By this time, the hurricane of alpha origin chi rapidly flowing around Zhu Yuan's spirit had grown much thicker than before. Zhu Yuan felt a sense of satisfaction at the sight of the alpha origin chi tornado, as thoughts of leaving the alpha origin heaven rose in his mind. However, just as he was about to leave, a thought suddenly popped up. Since the alpha origin cliff and timeless met can support my spirit, what about the Saint Spirit Crystal? The Saint Spirit Crystal was also considered an ultimate treasure to the spirit. In the past, Zhu Yuan had never considered this option before, but after experiencing the alpha origin cliff and timeless mat today, he began to realize that he may have been underestimating the Saint Spirit Crystal. After a brief contemplation, he decided to give this idea a try. Thus, he began to call out the Saint Spirit Crystal. After a few breaths, Zhu Yuan's heart jumped violently as he felt a tiny speck of holy light rise from within his spirit, eventually coming to a stop above his spirit's head. Within the holy light, a milky white crystal ball slowly revolved. As the light sprinkled down onto his spirit, Zhu Yuan immediately felt his originally tired spirit begin to recover little by little. So it does work. The Saint Spirit Crystal can also be brought to the alpha origin heaven. Zhu Yuan was overjoyed. If he knew about this earlier, his cultivation progress would have been faster. As he felt his spirit recover, Zhu Yuan delayed no further and continued to collect alpha origin chi again. With the help of the Saint Spirit Crystal, Zhu Yuan managed to push on for a substantial period of time, before beginning to feel exhaustion spread throughout his spirit. This was a sign that he had completely reached his limit, and even the Saint Spirit Crystal was no longer able to do much. His spirit's gaze swept across the area, nodding in satisfaction, as it admired the giant storm of alpha origin chi around it. With a thought, the spirit descended, falling towards the link with its physical body. In the hall. By this time, many disciples were already done with their training session. Some of the new disciples were whispering excitedly to each other, evidently unable to stop gushing about the benefits of the alpha origin cliff and timeless mat. The treatment they received in the inner mountains far surpassed the outer mountains. Amidst the numerous whispers, someone suddenly saw that Zhu Yuan's eyes were still shut, and was immediately somewhat astonished. Wasn't this a little too long? Why is Zhu Yuan still cultivating? He can last so long in the Alpha Origin heaven. How can it be? Haven't you seen that even first senior brother Zhu Tai has already finished his training? The numerous disciples were bewildered, some of the senior disciples in particular looking at Zhu Yuan with skepticism. After all, 2 of the purple sash disciples' spirits had reached the perfect illusory stage, but even they had already completed their session long ago. Cao Shi also opened his eyes, coldly looking at Zhu Yuan as he indifferently said, "Our new gold sash third seat does have a talent for acting." Evidently, he believed Zhu Yuan was putting no in act just to please the crowds. The other disciples could not hold back their laughter when they heard this. Was Zhu Yuan really so immature? The few purple sash disciples at the very front also cast their puzzled looks over. This time, even Zhu Tai was somewhat bewildered. After all, this was just far too long. However, while they were making a din, Shen Taiyuan suddenly shouted, "Silence." The numerous disciples were stunned as they looked towards Shen Taiyuan, only to find that the latter's eyes were glowing as he stared at Zhu Yuan, causing them to be startled. Shen Taiyuan was far stronger than all of them. Could he have discovered something? Could it be? Is Zhu Yuan truly able to endure for so long in the Alpha Origin heaven? They stared at Zhu Yuan's figure in disbelief. While they were still lost in their confusion, the space above Zhu Yuan began to shake. Next, the numerous disciples saw a stream of Alpha Origin Qi begin falling from above, a seemingly endless torrent enveloping Zhu Yuan's figure. It flowed in the moment it touched Zhu Yuan's body, flooding into his Qi dwelling. The eyes of the many disciples were wide open as they watched unblinkingly, counting how long it would last. 100 breaths. 500 breaths. 1,000 breaths. 2,000 breaths. When the number of breath reached 3,000, the expression of the numerous senior disciples began to tremble. 3,000 breaths was something even most of the gold sash disciples could not achieve. The only ones to reach such a level were basically the few purple sash disciples. Cao Shi's originally sneering face had now turned somewhat ugly. They found that even after 3,000 breaths, the flow of Alpha Origin Qi above Zhu Yuan still showed no signs of tiring. Under the crowd's shocked gazes, the Alpha Origin Qi continued to descend. 3,500 breaths. 4,000 breaths. 5,000 breaths. When it reached 5,000 breaths, the interior of the hall finally began to shake, numerous disciples gasping as their gazes were involuntarily cast towards the wall. On the Alpha Origin wall, 5,000 breaths had already entered the all-time top 10. For the past few years, there had not been a single disciple that had broken past 5,000 during his or her first time utilizing the Alpha Origin Cliff and Timeless Mat. At the highest point in the hall, Shen Taiyuan's stern and aged face trembled slightly at this moment, his eyes tightly glued to Zhu Yuan. Because the Alpha Origin Qi was still falling strand by strand. The top 3 on the Alpha Origin wall were all able to reach over 5,800 breaths on their first try. At that time, the spirits of all 3 individuals had stepped into the corporeal stage. From the looks of it, Zhu Yuan's spirit should also be at that level, but I wonder if he will be able to catch up to those 3. Under Shen Taiyuan's nervous gaze, the Alpha Origin Qi rapidly descended while time continued to flow. 5,300 breaths. 5,500 breaths. 5,800 breaths. When it reached this number, the entire hall fell deathly silent once more. Only the heavy breathing of everyone could be heard. Because all of them could see that the Alpha Origin Qi was still continuing to fall, surpassing 5,800 breaths, before eventually stopping at 6,743 breaths. This number had not only surpassed the best record on the Alpha Origin wall, but had even exceeded it by almost 1,000. Cold sweat emerged on everyone's foreheads, as stared at Zhu Yuan's figure in shock and amazement. Even Cao Shi's expression had turned rigid, traces of shock still present in his eyes. On the highest seat, Shen Taiyuan breathed in deeply, his eyes burning hotter than even as he gazed at Zhu Yuan, his body shaking as he mumbled, "Is my St. Genesis Peak going to rise up once again?" There was only silence in the hall, every gaze tinged with a sliver of disbelief as they gazed at Zhu Yuan's figure. Everyone had clearly been shocked by the timing of over 6,000 breaths. This was 6,700 breaths. One must know that even in the history of St. Genesis Peak, the most outstanding disciple had only managed to reach 5,800 breaths during his first time, while Zhu Yuan had just surpassed this record by nearly 1,000. How the hell did he do it? Everyone found it unimaginable. Even Ju Tai, Zhong Yang and the rest of the Purple Sash disciples were stunned. They clearly understood what this number represented. It meant that during the Alpha Origin stage, Zhu Yuan's cultivation speed would surpass all of them. Because he was capable of bringing back several times more Alpha Genesis Qi than them. Junior brother is extraordinary indeed. It is no wonder that teacher Shen has placed such high hopes in him. Ju Tai felt rather gratified. His was gentle and frank by nature, and did not feel threatened by the potential Zhu Yuan had displayed. Instead, he was genuinely happy that such an amazing disciple had appeared in their Saint Genesis Peak. However, it was clear that not every disciple shared the same feelings. At the very least, Cao Shi's expression was fluctuating indeterminately as he stared at Zhu Yuan's figure. He had never really given much thought to Saint Genesis Peak's current circumstances. In his opinion, such matters were the problem of Elder Shen and the other elders, and had nothing to do with him. He was only a Gold Sash disciple after all. But Zhu Yuan's arrival had begun to threaten Cao Shi's status and benefits. Not only had Zhu Yuan been given the Gold Genesis cave dwelling he had been eyeing, even the Gold Sash third seat that was originally his was now being occupied by the former. All of these factors clearly made him extremely furious. In his point of view, no matter how talented Zhu Yuan was, and regardless of how much potential he had, he was ultimately only a new disciple. What right did he have to step over Cao Shi's head? Of course, the main reason why due to his jealous heart. He had climbed his way up in Saint Genesis Peak for so many years, step by step from a normal inner mountain disciple to his current position, and faced all kinds of difficulties along the way. But what about Zhu Yuan? He had practically ascended the heavens in a single step the moment he stepped into the inner mountains. How Cao Shi's heart remained calm in the face of this? In this world, there were always those that would find fault in others instead of first examining themselves. At this current moment, the numerous disciples in the vicinity were looking at Cao Shi with strange gazes. After all, he had been the first one to start mocking Zhu Yuan. Who could have expected Zhu Yuan to counter so mercilessly, practically giving the former a blow that made him see stars? These gazes caused the expression in Cao Shi's eyes to darken, evidently extremely embarrassed and angry. He had originally intended on saying something to redeem himself, but ultimately swallowed the words at his throat. All he did was icily glare at Zhu Yuan's figure, grit his teeth and secretly say to himself, "Kid, I'll let you be happy for now. After 5 days, I will naturally make you understand that there are rules in this place." The Alpha Origin Qi Zhu Yuan brought back had indeed astonished Cao Shi, but so what? Zhu Yuan was still only a second-layer Alpha Origin, while Cao Shi was a formidable individual even amongst the 5th-layer Alpha Origin. The gap between them was enormous. Therefore, Cao Shi planned on teaching Zhu Yuan that no matter how great your potential, it was at the end of the day only potential. The current Zhu Yuan did not have the qualifications to butt heads with him. Regardless of how much potential you have, you should come back only after you've turned that potential into strength. As for now, you'd better behave yourself. Under the numerous gathered gazes of shock, Zhu Yuan opened his eyes as he felt the Genesis Qi filling his Qi dwelling, Genesis Qi star after star flickering within it as they gave off peculiar undulations. The number of Genesis Qi stars in his Qi dwelling was now over 400, a number much greater than when had he initially reached the Alpha Origin stage. The Alpha Origin Qi he brought back, just earlier, had increased the number of stars by nearly 10, showing just how effective this training session had been. A pleased smile appeared in Zhu Yuan's eyes. At this rate, it would not be long till he broke into the 3rd-layer Alpha Origin stage. The Alpha Origin Qi I brought back this session lasted over 6,700 breaths. If I only take the Alpha Origin Cliff and Timeless Mat into account, I should be able to hit roughly 6,000 breaths. This means that the additional 700 breaths are attributed to the Saint Spirit Crystal. Zhu Yuan was somewhat surprised, clearly not expecting the Saint Genesis Crystal to possess such a function that he had neglected before. Looks like the Saint Spirit Crystal was a cultivation treasure that did not lose out to the Alpha Origin Cliff and Timeless Mat. As he calmed the emotions in his heart, Zhu Yuan lifted his head, only to discover traces of remnant shock in the numerous gazes around him. His expression appeared rather cool. After all, he had already experienced a similar event in the outer mountains, while also knowing what 6,000 breaths represented. The silence in the hall gradually vanished as the numerous disciples in the hall met Zhu Yuan's gaze. This time, however, there was less scrutiny in the eyes of the senior disciples were. They had been skeptical of Zhu Yuan earlier, because they felt that he was not worthy of Shen Taiyuan's expectations. But now, Zhu Yuan had at last displayed some of his potential. Although the amount of Alpha Origin Qi 1 brought back would not be able to decide everything, it proved to everyone that there was indeed something special about him. Zhu Yuan, you've done well. It was at this moment that a voice was heard. Numerous disciples looked over, only to find Shen Taiyuan gazing at Zhu Yuan with glowing eyes, an extremely rarely seen smile appearing on his usually stern and rigid face. It was obvious that he was extremely satisfied by Zhu Yuan's performance. Besides that, congratulations for breaking the all-time record for most amount of Alpha Origin Qi brought back on the first time utilizing the Alpha Origin Cliff and Timeless Mat. Shen Taiyuan chuckled as he pointed towards the wall. Light began to appear as a row of words appeared in the spot where first place had originally been recorded. Zhu Yuan, 6,743 breaths. Zhu Yuan was also somewhat astonished, clearly surprised that he had accidentally broken the all-time record. Afraid that Zhu Yuan would lose himself to joy, Shen Taiyuan immediately warned, but don't become complacent. A record such as this is merely a tiny bit of encouragement, and will not guarantee your future accomplishments. You still have to work hard. Disciple understands. Zhu Yuan chuckled. A record like this would only be dismissed by a laugh from him, because he clearly understood that this record meant nothing. After all, bringing back more Alpha Origin Qi did not mean his future achievements would be greater. One needed to courageously advance on the path of cultivation. Only the accumulation of effort and time would bring about results in the future. Shen Taiyuan nodded, feeling more and more pleased with Zhu Yuan. It seems that the heavens had not abandoned their Saint Genesis Peak. To think that they would welcome such an astonishingly talented disciple even in such miserable times. However, he soon recalled the duel between Zhu Yuan and Cao Shi in 5 days. After some hesitation, Shen Taiyuan said, "You have great potential, there is really no rush for you to compete with the others now." However, just as the words left his mouth, Cao Shi's gaze flashed as he suddenly cut in, "Don't worry Teacher Shen, even if Zhu Yuan loses and the Purple Genesis Cave dwelling ends up with us, as long as the other fellow brother disciples do not object, disciple is willing to withdraw and let junior brother Zhu Yuan have it." His generous words made several disciples cast looks of amazement at him, clearly surprised that the one who had been making things difficult for Zhu Yuan, at every step would suddenly choose to give in. However, Cao Shi's actions also made some of the senior disciples frown slightly, feeling that Teacher Shen was being quite unfair to the former. This made them sympathize with him a little, while also giving rise to a slight rejection towards Zhu Yuan. After all, many disciples felt that Zhu Yuan was already given a lot of benefits that were taken from the share of senior disciples like them. Zhu Yuan coldly watched Cao Shi's generous and righteous performance, seeing through the latter's intentions. Cao Shi was undoubtedly applying the concept of retreating first in order to advance further, making the other disciples pity him, while giving rise to certain criticisms about Zhu Yuan. From the looks of it, Cao Shi's tactic had some effect. After all, Zhu Yuan currently did not have any influence here, and had no way to sway the others. Hence, he shook his head and said, "Teacher Shen, since the match has already been fixed, there will naturally be no such thing as changing it. If not, how will disciple find a place for himself here in the future?" He could not be bothered with such petty tricks, because they would not amount to much at the end of the day. As long as the scheduled match 5 days later took place, Zhu Yuan would naturally teach Cao Shi the meaning of despair. Upon hearing this, Shen Taiyuan did not speak any further on the matter, only nodding his head. That will be all for today's morning class, everyone is dismissed. The numerous disciples acknowledged one after another. Cao Shi also bowed and cupped his fists together, but while his head was lowered, he shot a glance at Zhu Yuan from the corner of his eye as a sneer rose from the corners of his lips. "So what if you have potential? At the very, dealing with you now is easy as a flip of my hand. I'm dying to see how disappointed Teacher Shen and the other disciples will be when you lose to me 5 days later." This video will end here.